Karen called the cops on me. Third time this month, she stood there with that smug little HOA clipboard, ready to watch me get hauled off for non-compliance. But when the patrol car pulled up, both officers stepped out, took one look at my husband, and snapped into a salute. I swear Karen nearly swallowed her dentures. Back before all this HOA madness started, my life was different. Not perfect, not some Pinterest dream board or anything, but mine. I was working as a freelance landscape designer. Nothing fancy, mostly private homes, a few small businesses. I loved it. I loved watching a dead patch of grass turn into something alive and intentional. It felt like painting, just with dirt under your nails. Tom and I had bought the house in Crestwood Hollow a couple years earlier. Townhouse, 2 stories. One of those charming suburban communities with identical mailboxes and trees, all planted the same exact distance apart. You know the type. Still, it felt like a step forward. Our step. First real place we owned. We didn't have kids. Weren't planning on it either. Just the 2 of us and our mutt Cooper, who sheds like he's trying to make a new dog out of fur every week. We were happy. Not Instagram happy, but real happy. The kind where you argue about dumb stuff like who forgot to close the cereal box, but then laugh about it later in bed eating ice cream out of the same bowl. Then the accident happened. I wasn't even doing anything crazy, just headed home from a consult with a client. Highway was quiet, music low, eyes on the road. The last thing I remember was seeing headlights where they shouldn't have been. Guy in the other car was drunk, crossed over 2 lanes and hit me head on. The paramedic said it was a miracle I lived. Honestly, some days it didn't feel like it. I woke up with pins in my spine and a nurse explaining what a complete spinal cord injury meant. 7T8, for those who know what that means. For everyone else, waist down, gone. No more running, dancing in the kitchen, climbing a step stool to get the good wine glasses. That version of me, she was gone too. And let me tell you, there's no manual for mourning a version of yourself that nobody else can see but you. Tom was steady, too steady. Like he didn't know how to break down, so he just didn't. I think he thought he had to be stoned for both of us. I was so full of anger at the time I couldn't even appreciate it. We'd have stupid fights. Him trying to help me with things I didn't want help with. Me snapping at him, just to feel like I still had some control over anything. It wasn't fair. He never said that, but I knew he thought it. We were living upstairs when I came home from the hospital, which is laughable, right? I mean, think about that. No elevator, no stair lift, no ramp. Just 14 oak stairs between me and sleeping in my own damn bed. For a while, Tom set up this makeshift bedroom in the dining room. Mattress on the floor. Curtain rod from IKEA separating me from the kitchen. I hated it. Not because it was small or cramped or ugly. Because it was temporary. It felt like I was squatting in my own home. Like everything had become provisional, including me. The house had meant something to me when we bought it. It wasn't just drywall and crown molding. It was proof that we were doing okay, that our life was moving forward. And after the accident, it became something else entirely. A battlefield. A place I had to fight to exist in. That's when I started researching lifts. Not the big, clunky chair lifts you see in infomercials. I'm talking sleek, near-silent residential vertical lifts. Minimal footprint, modern design blends into the exterior wall, like it belongs there. I wanted something that would make the second floor mine again. I didn't want to be confined to one level, like a guest in my own life. Tom was cautious. He's always cautious. He didn't say no, just kept asking if I was sure. Are you sure it's worth the trouble? Are you sure it's safe? I think deep down he was scared of the cost. Financially, emotionally, all of it. But I was past scared. I was desperate. That lift wasn't just about mobility. It was about dignity. And at first, it seemed simple. The company I found handled everything. Blueprints, permits, compliance. They even offered to file the request to the HOA directly. I remember thinking, okay, this might actually be easier than I thought. I didn't even know who was running the HOA at the time. I figured it was just a group of neighbors who voted on garden gnome policies and whether the garbage bins were visible from the street. That's when Karen entered the picture. Though at the time, I didn't know her name. I just got a reply email that said the request was under review and would need to be evaluated for aesthetic compatibility. That phrase stuck with me. Not safety, not accessibility, aesthetic compatibility. Like my independence was a threat to the neighborhood vibe. But okay, maybe they just needed time. Maybe they'd come around once they saw how minor the lift really was. I didn't want to believe that someone would actively stand in the way of something like this. It seemed too cruel, too petty. But petty doesn't even begin to cover it. And I was about to learn exactly how far some people are willing to go to keep everything looking just right, even if it means ruining someone else's life in the process. Couple weeks after I sent in the paperwork for the lift, I got a note stuffed into our mailbox. Not a letter, not even an envelope. Just a folded up piece of printer paper with the HOA logo printed at the top, like that somehow made it official. No signature, no contact name, just additional documentation required. See attached list. Except there was no attached list. I remember holding that crumpled paper in my lap, just staring at it, thinking, what the hell is this supposed to mean? We'd already submitted blueprints, structural assessments, manufacturer specs. Hell, we even gave them a visual mock-up with little digital shrubbery around the base of the lift to make it look cute. We had dotted every I, crossed every T. And now suddenly there's some additional documentation they forgot to specify? Tom said it was probably just a clerical hiccup. Maybe it's just one of those forms they forgot to include, he said, in that calm, measured voice he uses when he's trying not to rile me up. And normally that would have worked. But something about the tone of the message, it wasn't bureaucratic. It felt personal. Lazy, like someone didn't think I deserved the courtesy of actual communication, like I wasn't worth the effort. So I emailed back, politely. I asked what documents were needed, who I should speak to directly, and whether we could expedite the process given the nature of the request. You'd think I asked for a helipad on the roof. No one replied. Instead, a few days later, a woman shows up on my property with a clipboard and this fake smile energy that made my skin crawl. Tight khakis, pressed polo with the HOA seal, little lanyard name tag swinging off her neck like a badge of honor. She didn't knock, didn't ring the bell, just stood at the edge of our yard, looking around like she was casing the place. I wheeled myself outside, right out the front door. She barely flinched, introduced herself as Karen Bliss, president of the HOA. The name hit me like a mosquito bite. Tiny, annoying, but something told me it was going to itch later. She gave me this overly chipper, "Oh, I didn't realize anyone was home," and then launched straight into a monologue about concerns raised by the architectural committee. Which, by the way, I later found out is just her friend Paula from 2 doors down, and a guy named Roger who doesn't even live in the neighborhood anymore, but shows up for the free wine at meetings. Karen kept using words like harmony and visual cohesion, like she was reading off a wine bottle label. I asked her, point blank, what the actual issue was with the lift. She gave me this tight smile and said, well, these types of installations can open the door to a lot of, unintended changes in the community aesthetic. She was standing on my lawn, telling me my right to access my own damn home might disturb the neighborhood vibe. I asked her if she realized I was in a wheelchair, that this wasn't a sunroom or a deck extension. It was a medical necessity. She didn't blink, just said, of course. And we're very sensitive to that. But we also have to think about the long-term impact on property values. If everyone starts modifying their homes, where does it stop? Where does it stop? She said it like I was trying to install a rave lounge or paint the house neon green. The thing is, she didn't threaten me. Not directly. That's what made it so unnerving. She wrapped everything in this passive-aggressive gift wrap. Nothing I could point to and say, that right there is illegal. But my gut was screaming. You know that feeling when someone smiles at you, but their eyes are cold? That was Karen, smiling while building the wall in front of me, brick by brick. After she left, Tom said I might be reading too much into it. Let's just see what they come back with, he said. But I already knew. That wasn't an inspection. That was a warning shot, and she made sure I saw her pull the trigger with manicured fingers and a polite little smirk. She wanted me to know she was in control. And that was her first mistake. After Karen's little visit, things started to get sticky. It wasn't like they came out and said no to the lift. That would have been too easy. Too straightforward. No, instead, the HOA sent a follow-up letter. This time typed on actual letterhead with just enough lawyerly language to feel official without actually saying anything concrete. It said the review process was ongoing and that they'd require further documentation for evaluation of impact on external uniformity. whatever the hell that meant. I called the lift company and asked if this was normal. The guy on the phone sighed and said, "Not usually, unless someone's trying to stall you." And that's exactly what it felt like, a stall, a big, sticky wall of procedural molasses designed to slow me down until I gave up and rolled away. But I didn't give up. We resubmitted everything. Again. More blueprints, more specs, even a side-by-side visual rendering of the lift fully installed, showing it from the street. You could barely tell it was there unless you were looking for it. Hell, the HVAC box on the side of the house looked bigger. A week later, I get a letter taped to my front door. Taped like I was being evicted or something. It said the HOA would be conducting a property compliance inspection in relation to non-approved exterior modifications. I read it 3 times before it clicked. They were talking about the temporary ramp Tom and his brother had built so I could at least get out the damn front door while we waited. Let me paint the picture. 2 wood planks, pressure-treated, solid, with a non-slip strip down the middle. Wasn't beautiful, no, but it was safe, secure, and temporary. We even kept it within the bounds of the flower bed so it didn't extend onto the public sidewalk. Tom had stained it to match the porch railing. Honestly, I thought he did a hell of a job. Karen thought otherwise. She showed up during the inspection wearing a sun visor and holding a clipboard like she was auditing a nuclear facility. She paced around the front of the house with 2 other HOA members I'd never seen before, pointing at things and whispering like teenagers in a mall food court. I came out and parked on the porch, watching them. Karen didn't look at me when she spoke. She just said, "The ramp was not pre-approved and does not meet community standards for permanent or semi-permanent exterior structures." I told her it was temporary. She said, "Temporary is a subjective term when it's been visible for more than 30 days. I asked if she'd rather I crawl to the mailbox instead. She blinked once, tight-lipped, then marked something down on her clipboard. After they left, a notice showed up in my inbox. An official violation for unapproved construction, a $50 fine escalating weekly if not resolved. It was surreal, like I was being punished for existing. I could barely move through my own home, and now I was being charged for trying to fix it. Tom was furious. He wanted to pay the fine just to shut it down. "Let's not give them an excuse to escalate," he said, but I told him no. If we paid that fine, we were admitting we did something wrong, and we didn't. Not even close. From there, it got dumber by the day. Someone from the HOA accidentally cut our irrigation line while doing community maintenance near our front hedges. Our mailbox was flagged for being a 1/4 inch too high, even though it had been that way since we moved in, and then came the real kicker. Karen submitted a motion to the HOA board to revise the architectural guidelines to explicitly forbid any vertical elevation mechanisms visible from the public walkway. I read that phrase so many times I thought my eyeballs would fall out. She wasn't just blocking me anymore. She was trying to change the rules to make me illegal. At the next HOA meeting, which I attended via Zoom, they wouldn't even let me speak. Karen said, "This isn't a forum for personal grievances," and muted me. Me, in a meeting about a rule that was being written specifically to target me. After that, neighbors started acting weird. Not all of them. Some still waved, smiled, asked how I was doing, but a few started giving me that look. You know the one. The tight smile, quick nod, then eyes darting away. Like I was contagious, like I'd brought trouble to their perfect little neighborhood. I started keeping track of everything. Every letter, every visit, every comment. I built a folder, labeled it HOA War Crimes. Half joke, half coping mechanism. But inside, I wasn't laughing. I was exhausted. Not just from the fight, but from what it was doing to me. I caught myself apologizing to Tom for being a burden, for making things hard, for not just letting it go. He grabbed my hand and said, "You're not the problem. They are." And I wanted to believe him. I really did, but the more they pushed, the more I started wondering if this lift was even worth it. Maybe they'd win. Maybe Karen and her army of clipboard Karens would grind me down until I stopped fighting and just learned to live small. And then something happened. A shift. Not big, not loud, not even visible at first. But it was coming. I just didn't know it yet. By the time summer started breathing down our necks, I had a fat binder full of HOA nonsense and a tension headache that wouldn't quit. But I was still trying to play by the rules. I really was. I hadn't given up on the idea that maybe, just maybe, if I approached it the right way, spoke to the right people, followed every protocol with tweezers and gloves, something would finally crack open. Not everything in life had to be a damn war. So I wrote a formal letter. 3 pages, neatly formatted, no sarcasm, no bitterness. Just facts. I included the ADA compliance section, links to federal guidelines, copies of the lift design, and even a soft little plea about how this wasn't cosmetic. It was about mobility, about freedom. I ended it with, "I'm asking for your cooperation, not confrontation," which, in hindsight, feels a little too sweet for what I was actually feeling. I sent it to the HOA board, not just Karen, and then I waited. I waited like I was waiting for a college acceptance letter or a medical diagnosis. Staring at my inbox, refreshing it like it owed me something. After 4 days, I got a reply. It was from a board member named Jim, who I'd never met in person, but his email was oddly short. "We are reviewing all communications and will advise." That was it. No name, no thanks for reaching out, no acknowledgement of the content, just "will advise." Figured, okay, maybe they're circling the wagons, talking behind closed doors, maybe Karen's pushing back, but someone else on that board has to be a real human, right? Someone who's seen a ramp before without calling a meeting about it. Tom tried to help in his way. He offered to reach out to a friend of his who was a lawyer, retired, but still plugged in. The guy's name was Wallace, and he agreed to take a look pro bono. He called me the next day and said, "They're stonewalling you, on purpose, and unless you have money to sue or a lot of public pressure, they'll just keep doing it." I didn't want to sue. Not yet. I wanted to avoid dragging this out into a spectacle. Besides, lawsuits cost money. Money we didn't have. So I tried another route. I called the city zoning office, thinking maybe I could bypass the HOA if the city deemed the lift necessary for medical access. The guy I spoke to was polite but noncommittal. He said, "Unfortunately, in HOA-managed developments, local zoning defers to private covenants unless there's a direct violation of civil code," which is the government's way of saying, "Not our problem." Then I called the state's Disability Rights Agency. Left a message. Waited. Got a voicemail 2 days later with a number to a regional ADA compliance consultant. That guy picked up, sounded about half awake, and told me that unless my HOA had written rules violating federal access laws, there wasn't much they could do preemptively. He suggested I document everything and maybe try mediation. Mediation. Like I was having a marital spat with my neighbor over who parked too close to the mailbox. I went back to Karen. I knocked on her door. She opened it in full tennis gear, visor and all, and looked surprised to see me. Not rude, just surprised, like she never expected me to show up in person. I said, "I don't want this to become ugly." She crossed her arms and said, "It's already become disruptive." That word, disruptive. Like I was the problem. Like her campaign of passive-aggressive cruelty had been a calm little lake until I went and tossed in a pebble. I told her I wanted to work together, that I wasn't trying to fight, that I didn't want this to become some viral news story or a legal battle. She smiled and said, "Then maybe you should consider adapting your living space in a way that doesn't affect others." I just stood there. She was telling me to rearrange my life around her comfort, like she expected me to live downstairs forever, out of sight, out of mind, like a piece of mismatched furniture she didn't want cluttering up the showroom. I walked or rolled away without saying another word. After that, I tried going around her entirely. I reached out to a few neighbors. 1 or 2 were sympathetic, but nobody wanted to get involved. One guy literally said, "You seem nice, but Karen's got a long memory." That stuck with me. Karen wasn't just the HOA president. She was a collector of grudges. I even called a local church. Not ours. We're not particularly religious, but I thought maybe they had a community outreach team or something. I spoke with a pastor named Hollis. By kind voice. The kind that makes you feel like you're already forgiven for things you haven't done yet. He said he'd pray for me, and that the Lord has a way of revealing people's true character. At the time, I wasn't looking for divine character arcs. I just wanted a damn lift. The last thing I tried was filing a formal complaint through the HOA's own internal system. Yes, the same one that was trying to screw me. It was like reporting a mugging to the mugger, but I figured if they were going to bury me in paperwork, I'd bury them right back. I submitted every document again with a timestamp and mailed a copy certified just so they couldn't say they didn't get it. A few days later, I got a notice in the mail. The board had received my appeal and would discuss it at the next meeting. No indication of when that meeting was, and that was the moment. Not a big crash, not a dramatic meltdown, just a quiet little flicker inside me, like a pilot light going out. I looked at all the emails, the letters, the voicemails, the empty assurances. I looked around the downstairs half of our house that had become my entire world, and I finally let the thought in. Maybe I really am stuck. I didn't say it out loud, not to Tom, not even to myself, but it was there, a quiet surrender whispering through the walls. They wanted me to give up, and God help me. I was starting to think they'd win. I didn't plan to break down that night, but you know how it goes. You keep holding it in, playing strong, trying to smile when people say things like, "You're so brave," when all you really want to do is scream into a pillow. And then something tiny snaps the thread. For me, it was a sock, a stupid rolled-up sock that fell behind the dresser while I was trying to clean up from the floor like I always do now, awkwardly, half twisting from the chair, using a reacher claw, and too much hope. The sock slipped between the wall and the dresser and disappeared, and that was it. I just sat there, on the floor, crying like the goddamn world was ending, because it felt like it was, because I was exhausted, because I couldn't reach a sock, because every time I tried to build my life back, Karen showed up with a sledgehammer and a smile. Tom found me like that. Quiet tears, reacher dropped, one sock on, one lost. He didn't say anything. Just got down on the floor next to me, pulled me in, and held me for a long time. Then he whispered, "You want me to make this stop?" I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I was too tired to even pretend I had fight left in me. So I just said, "I don't know what to do anymore. I don't think it matters." That's when he said it. "Maybe it's time I stop pretending I'm just your husband." I remember pulling back and looking at him, confused. And then he said it again, a little clearer this time. "Maybe it's time I handle this as the sheriff." I blinked. Now, to be clear, I knew Tom worked in law enforcement. Of course I did, but we never talked about titles. He never brought it home with him. I knew he wore a badge and worked long shifts, and sometimes his phone would buzz with updates even when we were having dinner. But the word sheriff? That hadn't come up, ever. Not once, in the years we'd been together. He'd always been quiet about work. Kept it separate, said he liked knowing there was a space in his life where he wasn't the uniform. I respected that, never pushed, never really asked, honestly. He was just Tom to me, my husband, my steady, my person. But in that moment I saw him differently, not just as my partner, but as a man with power, with access, with resources. He must have seen the storm of thoughts in my face because he quickly added, "I didn't want to pull rank. I didn't want to use my position to force anything, especially here, in our home, but I've let this go on too long. I thought maybe they'd come around. I was wrong." I just stared at him. He gave me this look. Soft but steady. "You didn't ask for this fight, but if they want to keep pushing, then they're going to have to go through me now." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry again, so I did both. Messy, ugly sob laughing in his arms on the living room floor, like a crazy person, because suddenly everything felt different. Not fixed, not over, but different, like someone had finally turned on the lights in a room I didn't know I'd been trapped in. That night, he sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and started writing names, people on the county records committee, contacts in zoning, attorneys he trusted, a judge he knew from an old case who had experience with ADA violations. I watched him write and underline and circle things, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was drowning alone. He wasn't just showing up for me. He was suiting up, and something about that terrified me, in a good way, because if Tom was stepping in, this wasn't going to be a quiet little back and forth anymore. This was about to get real. The next morning started earlier than usual. Tom was already in the kitchen, half-dressed in uniform pants and a worn-out t-shirt, coffee mug in one hand, phone in the other, scribbling something down in that slow, deliberate way he has when he's thinking 10 steps ahead. He looked at me like I wasn't just his wife anymore. I was a co-conspirator, and that energy, it was contagious. He didn't make a big speech or lay out a dramatic plan like in the movies. It was quieter than that. Just a look, a nod, and a steady voice that said, "We're not letting them push you out of your own life." I wasn't even sure what I could do at that point. I was so used to being on defense, reacting, explaining, apologizing, that the idea of building a plan felt almost alien. But Tom, he'd already started laying the foundation, and it wasn't just about him throwing his badge around. That would have made this easy to dismiss as a power play. This wasn't that. He wanted it airtight. The first step was getting eyes on the HOA's paper trail. That part wasn't too hard. Turns out a lot of their documents, especially the architectural guidelines and board meeting notes, were technically public within the community. So Tom filed a formal request under the association's own rules, citing due process. Karen couldn't deny it without violating their own bylaws, and she knew it. A week later, a giant envelope showed up in our mailbox. Minutes, bylaws, amendment proposals, violation logs. Most of it was dull as hell, but a few pages, gold. We found 2 separate instances where the HOA had approved modifications, both clearly visible from the street. One was a pergola someone built over their driveway. The other, a second-story sunroom with wraparound windows that jutted out like a glassy tumor. Both were signed off without a single notation about aesthetic harmony or external elevation. Guess whose name was on both approval forms? Karen. One of them even had a hand-scrawled note in the margin that read, "Looks great. Happy to support." Tom took photos, scanned everything, made a digital backup. Then he reached out to a friend who used to work in county zoning. She wasn't involved directly, but offered to help us interpret some of the more dense legal phrasing in the HOA's charter. She also pointed out that the HOA's authority only extended to new amendments if they had been voted on by a majority of residents. That lift ban Karen tried to sneak through at the last board meeting? Yeah, no vote, no resident input, and no record of formal adoption. It was a scare tactic dressed up like a rule. We weren't just looking for hypocrisy anymore. We were hunting for procedural failure. Meanwhile, I started reaching out to a couple neighbors again, not to beg for support, but to share information. I figured if they were going to keep giving me those awkward half smiles and looking away, they might as well know what they were looking away from. I didn't do it loud, just quiet little conversations in driveways, over fences, through group texts. I shared what I'd found, told them how many modifications had been pushed through without the rest of us even knowing. A few were shocked. One guy flat out said, "Wait, Karen approved Greg's boat canopy but told you a medical lift was too disruptive?" Word started to spread. Then Tom and I started working on a formal demand letter, not a lawsuit. Not yet, just something that said, "We know, we have evidence, and we're not afraid to use it." He tapped a local civil rights attorney he knew. Not a big name, but sharp, methodical, and most importantly, someone who didn't fold under pressure. She helped draft a notice citing ADA protections, HOA procedural violations, and selective enforcement backed by their own records. It wasn't threatening. It was factual. Calm, not cold. Surgical. That letter was going to be the pressure valve. But Tom didn't stop there. He had something else brewing. One night, while I was brushing my teeth in the downstairs half bath, he came in with that same quiet fire in his eyes and said, "Remember Hollis, that pastor you talked to?" "Yeah," I said, mouthful of toothpaste. "He's agreed to meet with us. Turns out his niece is a community organizer. She's worked on HOA accountability cases before." I had no idea where that conversation would lead, but something about the way he said it made my spine straighten, like we weren't just standing up for me anymore. We were building something bigger than me. A case. A pattern. Wall of proof they couldn't wallpaper over with bureaucratic BS. It didn't happen overnight. The plan took shape, piece by piece, like building a bonfire from kindling, stacking dry bits of injustice until the whole damn thing was ready to catch fire. And when it did, I wanted Karen to be the one holding the match. When we finally sent the letter, it didn't feel like some epic drop-the-mic moment. It felt quiet, controlled, almost surgical. Tom printed it out on heavy paper, like courtroom filing stuff, and had it hand-delivered to Karen's front door by someone from the attorney's office. Not emailed, not mailed, dropped off in person. It was the kind of letter that didn't threaten. It reminded. Of rights, of laws, of violations, of names. It laid out the selective enforcement, the procedural failures, the ADA protections that had been trampled on like lawn weeds. And at the bottom, our attorney signed her name and left just one final sentence. If we do not receive an appropriate and timely resolution, we are prepared to escalate through all available legal and public channels. We knew Karen wouldn't cave right away. That's not her. She's the kind of person who has to try to win one more round, even when the table's already been flipped. And sure enough, her response came fast. A printed notice stuck to our door again, like we were getting evicted from a Motel 6. It was labeled Urgent Community Violation, Final Warning. This time, they were claiming the ramp, the temporary one, had been expanded without approval, which was a lie. We hadn't touched it in weeks. Then she took it further. She had the audacity to claim we were creating a pattern of antagonistic behavior toward the HOA, citing things like unauthorized contact with other homeowners and slanderous misrepresentation of HOA leadership. Can you believe that? Me, the woman who's been stuck living in half a house for nearly a year. Now I'm the threat to the neighborhood, but we didn't flinch. Tom forwarded the notice to our attorney. Within the day, she fired back a written demand for retraction and a warning that further baseless accusations would be considered harassment. Karen didn't back down. She doubled down. That week, we had 2 separate anonymous complaints filed against us. One said our porch light was too bright. The other, that our trash bin was left out too long, even though pickup had been delayed by city workers, which literally everyone on the block knew. It was so transparent it was almost funny. Almost. Tom started documenting everything publicly. He opened a private online forum for Crestwood Hollow residents, where he uploaded scans of the HOA approvals, photos of other houses with visible modifications, and a clear, detailed explanation of our case. Not in a ranty, us versus them way, just facts, receipts, proof. And people started paying attention. At first, it was just 1 or 2 folks replying, "Wait, I didn't know Karen needed to approve those kinds of things." Then came more. My request for a fence was denied, but I see 3 on the next street. And why does Greg have a sunroom no one voted on? Karen tried to shut it down. She sent a formal request to remove the page, claiming it was defamatory. We responded by citing First Amendment rights and inviting her to respond on the record. She didn't. Instead, she did what desperate people do. She tried to go low. A few nights later, someone tossed a handful of nails across our driveway. Not the little ones either. Long wood screws, like something you'd use for decking. I saw them glittering under the porch light when Tom went out to take the trash. He swept them up quietly. Didn't say a word, but I saw his jaw lock. The next day, he installed a camera facing the street. We didn't post about the nails. We didn't accuse. We just logged it. Quiet, controlled, that was our move now. Everything Karen did, we recorded, cataloged, filed. But here's the moment that really shifted the tide. Tom requested a formal audit of the HOA's financial activity. Legally, he was allowed to. As a homeowner, he had the right to review where our dues were going. It was a move Karen hadn't seen coming. 3 days later, we got a reply. Denied, she claimed. Records were currently under internal review and unavailable. That was a violation. And that's when Tom went to the county clerk's office and filed a formal complaint citing misuse of HOA funds and failure to provide transparent records. Now, it wasn't just about a lift. Now the county was looking at her. Karen didn't like that. She tried to push one last card, an emergency HOA board meeting to vote on a new policy banning any exterior mechanical modifications going forward. No names, just a rule aimed directly at me, dressed up like community improvement. But guess what? We showed up, Tom and I, in person. I wheeled right up to that meeting room in the community clubhouse, wearing my favorite leather jacket and no makeup. Because screw it, I was done performing. And when Karen tried to start the vote, Tom stood up, calm, precise, and said, "Before any voting occurs, I'd like to address the board with documented evidence of selective enforcement, noncompliance with ADA requirements, and a list of prior approvals granted without vote." He handed out folders, labeled dot, tabbed, indexed. No shouting, no drama, just facts. One of the board members, an older guy named Richard, flipped through the file, looked at Karen, and said, "Why weren't we shown this?" She didn't have an answer. And for the first time in months, I felt it. Momentum. Like something cracked. Like the ice under Karen's feet had finally started to splinter. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was just fighting back. I was winning. I don't think Karen ever believed it would actually happen. She was so used to running things with her little clipboard and a tight smile, so sure of herself, so absolutely convinced that people would grumble behind closed doors but never dare speak up. That's how she kept power. Just enough fear, just enough noise, just enough distraction. But the thing about people like Karen is they always underestimate what happens when you finally push someone too far, especially when that someone has receipts and a husband with a badge. It all came to a head at the community-wide HOA meeting. The big one, the one where every homeowner was supposed to be present, or at least represented, because it involved changes to annual dues and board elections. Normally, these meetings were yawn fests. People showed up for the free coffee, rolled their eyes at the minutes from the last quarter, and left halfway through. Not this time. This time, people came early, sat down in the folding chairs with actual interest in their eyes. Some had printouts of our digital forum posts. Others whispered quietly to each other while glancing toward the front of the room, where Karen sat in her usual spot, flanked by her board loyalists, wearing a perfectly pressed blazer like she was hosting a damn TED Talk. Tom and I arrived together. I rolled in, slow, steady, no drama, no declarations, just presence. But the shift in the room was instant. A few people nodded at me. A couple actually clapped when we entered. Not loud, not performative. Just solidarity. It was small, but it mattered. Karen tried to start the meeting like nothing had changed. She read off the agenda, business as usual, updates on landscaping contracts, noise complaints, reminders about seasonal decorations. She was halfway through a long-winded monologue about recycling bins when someone near the back, Mr. Collins, I think, stood up and said, "Before we move on, I think we should address the recent legal notice and demand letters sent to this board." The whole room went quiet. You could hear chairs creak. Karen looked up like a deer in headlights, caught somewhere between confusion and condescension. She stammered something about that matter being outside the scope of this meeting. But it was too late. The room had turned. And once a room turns on you, there's no clean way to claw it back. That's when Tom stood. He didn't raise his voice, didn't pound the table. He just calmly explained, like a man used to testifying in court, what had happened, what we'd discovered, and what was at stake. He mentioned the ADA, the financial records, the selective enforcement, the illegal vote on the lift ban. He didn't editorialize. He didn't call Karen a liar. He didn't have to. He laid the evidence down, piece by piece, like setting a table for truth. One by one, he handed out printed packets to board members and residents. It included emails, approvals signed by Karen, photos of modifications she'd greenlit for friends, financial irregularities that had never been reported in public budget disclosures. By the time he was done, Karen looked like she'd swallowed a thumbtack. Then I spoke. Not long. Not loud, but real. I told them how it felt to live half a life in a house I was supposed to call home. I told them about the nights I couldn't get upstairs to sleep next to my husband, about the humiliation of being fined for trying to function, about being ignored, shut down, made to feel like I didn't belong in my own neighborhood, and then I said something I hadn't planned on saying. I looked straight at Karen and said, "I tried to go through every proper channel. I begged, politely. I followed every rule. I asked for help, and you made it your mission to make me disappear. I'm not disappearing." That was it. Silence again. Then murmurs. And then finally, someone stood up, Paula, one of Karen's usual allies, and said, "I think it's time we voted on whether Karen should remain president of the board." Now that cracked the damn ceiling. People nodded. A few clapped again, louder this time. One guy stood and asked about the HOA's recall process. Another woman, Sarah from 2 houses down, brought up the financial denial Tom had received and said, "That's not just shady. It's illegal." Karen tried to regain control. She fumbled through her folder, claiming the board needed time to review everything before making decisions, but the crowd wasn't having it anymore. It was like the room had finally woken up, and no matter how calmly Karen tried to pat them back to sleep, it wasn't going to happen. People were asking real questions now about oversight, about elections, about dues. Things she'd managed to keep vague and opaque for years were suddenly center stage. A motion was filed to suspend her pending an independent audit. It passed, right there, in the same clubhouse where she'd once told me my independence was aesthetic disruption. When it was over, people gathered outside in little circles, talking. Some looked angry, others embarrassed. They hadn't noticed what had been happening. A few came over and apologized to me. Not big dramatic apologies, just quiet, honest ones. That was enough. Tom and I didn't stay long. We went home, closed the door, and sat in the living room for a while without speaking. Just breathing. I looked at him and said, "That actually happened, right?" He smiled, and I swear I don't know what felt better, that Karen had finally been held accountable, or that I had stopped being afraid of her. The lift hums when it moves, that soft, steady mechanical sound, barely louder than a ceiling fan. Funny how something so small can make your entire house feel different, not just more accessible, more mine. Sometimes I catch myself going up just because I can, not for anything in particular. Just for the feeling, the view from the upstairs window, the air, the quiet. We never made a big deal out of it when the installation finally happened. No ribbon cutting, no dramatic social media post, just a crew that came early one morning, did their job, and left a perfectly clean footprint behind. I remember watching them through the glass, feeling weirdly nervous, like if I blinked too hard, it might vanish, but it didn't. And when it was done, I rolled in, pushed the button, and just went up. Tom was standing at the top when the doors opened. He didn't say anything at first, just smiled at me like I'd climbed Everest. I cried a little. Of course I did. It wasn't just about elevation. It was about everything that had been taken, and everything we clawed back, inch by inch, signature by signature, page by page. Karen, she's not on the board anymore. After the audit and a few more discoveries that came tumbling out like loose bricks in a rotted wall, she voluntarily stepped down. That's the phrasing the HOA used in their little email announcement. No mention of misuse of funds, no mention of falsified approvals, no mention of me. She still lives here. I see her sometimes, walking her tiny white dog that looks like it hates everyone equally. She doesn't wave. I don't expect her to. The power's gone, and I think that's worse for her than any apology she could have offered. And honestly, that's fine with me. Some people don't change. They just get quieter when they lose the microphone. The neighborhood's different now, a little more awake. The new board president, Richard, the same guy who questioned her at the meeting, comes around once a month and actually talks to people, like real conversations. They even added a clause to the HOA charter about mandatory ADA compliance reviews. That part makes me weirdly proud. I still get mail from people who saw the forum posts. A woman across town who fought her HOA to build a ramp for her son. A guy who was fined for parking too close to the sidewalk while recovering from surgery. People are paying attention now, and I think that's what Karen never expected. What people like her never account for. That silence doesn't always mean surrender. Sometimes it just means someone's getting ready. Tom, he's the same. Solid, steady. Except now when people in the neighborhood call him sheriff, I don't feel awkward about it. I feel proud. Not because of his badge. Because he didn't use it to stomp. He used it to stand. Cooper's still shedding, like it's his career. The second floor is officially his now, too. He follows me up and down, like the whole house is a game board we unlocked together. It sounds dumb, but I didn't realize how much I missed watching him nap at the foot of our real bed, instead of curled up by the couch downstairs. It's the little things that gut you, and the little things that heal you. And me. I'm not who I was before the accident, and I'm definitely not who I was the first time Karen smiled at me like I was a problem to be contained. I'm something else now. Tougher, yeah. A little more tired, maybe, but sharper, quieter in a way that isn't weakness. The other day, I passed by the mirror in the upstairs hallway and stopped, just looked at myself for a second. The sunlight was hitting the wall weird, and Cooper was snoring somewhere nearby, and I caught this glimpse, not just of me, but of the whole damn journey. The fights, the forms, the phone calls, the nights I wanted to give up, And I thought, damn, you're still here. I still keep the folder, by the way. The one labeled HOA War Crimes. It's in a drawer now, tucked between a stack of design magazines and an old birthday card from my niece. I don't open it anymore, but I don't throw it out either. It's a reminder that I didn't back down, that the fight mattered, that sometimes, even in the quietest suburban cul-de-sac, you've got to raise a little hell to make room for peace. And peace feels pretty damn good.